Have you ever wondered what really fell from the sky in New Mexico back in 1947? A strange object crashed near a quiet ranch, and before anyone could understand what it was, the military sealed off the area. Witnesses described material they couldn't cut, burn, or bend. Others whispered about strange bodies being taken away under heavy guard. For decades, the government changed its story again and again. First a flying disc, then a weather balloon, then something else entirely. Keep watching as we uncover what truly happened during the mysterious Roswell UFO incident. Roswell, New Mexico, summer of 1947. The United States was just 2 years removed from World War II. The Cold War with the Soviet Union had begun. Nuclear anxiety dominated the world. New Mexico wasn't only a desert, it was home to some of America's most secret military programs. The White Sands Proving Ground, where captured Nazi missiles were tested, and Los Alamos, where the atomic bomb had been developed just 2 years earlier. Roswell Army Airfield was the only military base in the world equipped with nuclear bombers. The 509th Bombardment Group, the only active unit capable of delivering atomic weapons. It was one of the most secure and strategically important sites in the country. And it was here, right at the center of America's top military secrets, that something extraordinary was about to occur. But before understanding what happened in Roswell, we need to look at what was happening in 1947. 2 weeks before the Roswell event, a private pilot named Kenneth Arnold reported seeing 9 unusual flying objects near Mount Rainier in Washington. He described their motion as like saucers skipping across water. The media seized on that description and coined the term flying saucers. Almost overnight, reports of UFO sightings spread across the United States. In June and July of 1947, hundreds of sightings were reported. Flying saucer fever had taken hold of the country. The military grew concerned, not necessarily about aliens, but about the possibility that these were advanced Soviet aircraft flying in U.S. airspace. It was in this climate of fear and suspicion that the Roswell events unfolded. A thunderstorm, mysterious wreckage, and a series of official explanations that didn't add up. The story starts with a rancher named William MacBrazel. He managed the Foster Ranch, a remote property about 75 miles north of Roswell. Mac was a hard-working man who lived a quiet life tending sheep in the open desert. On the night of July 2nd, 1947, a violent storm swept through the area. Thunder, lightning, and fierce winds. Mac had experienced many desert storms before, but that night he heard something different, a deep explosion that didn't sound like thunder. The next morning, July 3rd, he went out to check on his sheep and inspect the property. That's when he saw it. Debris scattered across a field stretching roughly half a mile long. Pieces of something that had clearly fallen from the sky. As he walked closer, he realized the material was unlike anything he had ever seen. There were thin metallic sheets, but they didn't behave like normal metal. They were light as paper, but couldn't be torn or permanently bent. When crumpled, they instantly returned to their original shape. There was also a plastic-like substance, tougher than any known plastic at the time, and thin beams or rods incredibly light, yet strong, engraved with strange symbols. The markings looked like pictographs or hieroglyphics, but not from any alphabet Mac recognized. He gathered some of the debris and brought it home, showing it to his wife and children. They all agreed it was strange. At first, Mac thought it might be the remains of a government experiment, since the area was surrounded by military activity. But the more he studied it, the less sense it made. For several days, Mac kept the fragments, unsure what to do next. Then he began hearing news reports about flying saucers being spotted all over the country, and started to wonder if what he found could be related. On July 7th, Mac decided to report his discovery. He went to the office of Sheriff George Wilcox in Roswell. Wilcox listened carefully, examined the pieces, and immediately contacted Roswell Army Airfield. The base sent Major Jesse Marcel, an intelligence officer, to investigate. Jesse Marcel was a seasoned officer and World War II veteran. He had seen all kinds of military debris, aircraft parts, radar equipment, weather balloons, and could easily identify them. When he accompanied Mac back to the ranch that afternoon, what he saw left him completely baffled. Years later, in interviews, Marcel would recall that moment. "I knew right away it wasn't something we had. It wasn't a plane, it wasn't a missile, and it wasn't a weather balloon." The debris field was massive, with fragments spread across a large area. Marcel and a counterintelligence officer collected everything they could. They loaded Marcel's car and returned to the base that same night. On the way, Marcel stopped at his house. He woke his wife and son and showed them some of the pieces. "Look at this," he told them. "This came from something not of this world." His son, Jesse Marcel Jr., was only 11 years old, but that moment stayed with him forever. Decades later, he still remembered the strange beams with violet or purple hieroglyphic-like symbols engraved on them. Marcel brought the debris to the base, and soon after, things began to move quickly. July 8th, 1947, the day that changed Roswell's history. Colonel William Blanchard, commander of Roswell Army Airfield, made a surprising decision. He instructed the base's public information officer, Lieutenant Walter Haut, to issue a press release, and it was nothing short of shocking. It stated that the 509th Bombardment Group of Roswell Army Airfield had recovered a flying disc thanks to the cooperation of a local rancher and the Chavez County Sheriff's Office. The release was distributed to 2 local newspapers and 2 radio stations. Within hours, the story spread like wildfire. "RAAF captures flying saucer on ranch in Roswell region," read the front page of the Roswell Daily Record. Within hours, the news spread across the nation. Newspapers everywhere ran the story. The U.S. Army had captured a flying saucer. But then, something strange happened. Less than a day later, the Army completely reversed its statement. Brigadier General Roger Ramey, commander of the 8th Air Force in Fort Worth, Texas, held a press conference and gave a totally different explanation. The debris, he said, wasn't from a flying saucer at all. It came from a weather balloon equipped with a radar reflector. To support this claim, Ramey showed pieces of debris to the press, fragments of rubber, aluminum foil, and wooden sticks, clearly the remains of an ordinary weather balloon. Jesse Marcel was brought in for the conference. Photos show him standing beside the displayed material. But there's something unusual about those pictures. Marcel looks uneasy, and the debris looks nothing like what he had described finding on the ranch. The press accepted the official explanation, and the case was filed away as a simple misidentification, a weather balloon mistaken for a flying saucer. Yet, for those who had seen the original wreckage, something didn't add up. Mac Brazel was taken to the military base and kept there for almost a week. When he finally returned, friends and family noticed a clear change. He was quiet and withdrawn. He refused to talk about what had happened and only said one thing: "If I found another one of those discs, I wouldn't tell anyone." Sheriff Wilcox also received a visit from military officials. His family later revealed that he had been pressured not to speak about the case. As for Jesse Marcel, he continued his military service, but never forgot that night. 30 years later, when he finally decided to speak publicly, he was firm in his statement. That was not a weather balloon. "I know what I saw, but back in 1947, the case was officially closed. Or so it appeared. There was another side to the story, one that would only emerge decades later. Witnesses began claiming they had seen not only wreckage, but also bodies that were not human. The official Roswell story ended on July 8, 1947, with a weather balloon explanation. But for years afterward, rumors lingered in the small town of Roswell. People whispered about something more, something the government never acknowledged: alien bodies. In 1978, 31 years after the incident, UFO researcher Stanton Friedman gave a lecture in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. After the event, someone approached him and mentioned knowing a retired military officer who had handled debris from a crashed disc in Roswell. That officer was Jesse Marcel. Friedman tracked him down and conducted an interview. Marcel, now retired and free of military obligations, spoke openly. He confirmed that the debris he had found was not from a weather balloon. It was from something far more extraordinary. This interview reignited interest in Roswell and led researchers to seek other witnesses. What they discovered was surprising. Dozens of people in Roswell, many elderly by the 1980s, began sharing what they had seen or heard back in July 1947. And many of them mentioned bodies. Glenn Dennis, who worked at a local funeral home and also served as an ambulance driver for the military base, recalled a strange series of calls he received on July 5, 1947. The base was asking about small, hermetically sealed caskets and how to preserve bodies that had been exposed to the elements for several days. Curious, Dennis went to the base that afternoon to deliver supplies. He claimed he saw debris being unloaded from ambulances, some pieces marked with strange symbols. While there, he briefly met a nurse he knew. She looked shaken. Days later, Dennis said she met with him privately and told him something shocking. She had been called to assist with autopsies, and the bodies, she said, were not human. She described them as small, around 4 feet tall, with oversized heads, large black eyes, 4 fingers, and gray skin. According to Dennis, the nurse drew sketches of the bodies for him. Shortly after, she was transferred from the base, and he never saw her again. Years later, when Dennis tried to locate her, he was told she had died in a plane crash. No official records exist for a nurse by the name Dennis gave. Yet, he wasn't the only one who claimed to have seen bodies. Barney Barnett, a government civil engineer, reportedly came across a crashed craft and bodies at another site, on the plains of San Agustin, about 150 miles west of Roswell. According to second-hand accounts, Barnett had already passed away when his story became public. He and several others had found a broken disc-shaped object with small bodies nearby. Military personnel soon arrived, cleared the area, and warned everyone to stay silent. More witnesses later surfaced. Frankie Rowe, the daughter of a Roswell firefighter, said her father was called to the crash site. When he returned, he seemed deeply disturbed. He told his family he had seen a metallic craft and small bodies. Days later, according to Frankie, military officers came to their home and threatened her family with serious consequences if they spoke about it. Another man, Jim Ragsdale, said he had been camping with his girlfriend the night of the crash. They watched something fall from the sky in flames. The next morning, they found the wreckage and several bodies before the military arrived and forced them to leave. And the stories kept coming. Dozens of second-hand and third-hand accounts from people who knew someone stationed at the base, who had seen covered trucks moving in and out, or who had heard rumors about bodies being kept in the base hospital. Many of these witnesses were respected members of the community, veterans, locals with no history of seeking attention. But their testimonies surfaced decades later, often passed through several retellings. So how reliable are these accounts? Skeptics argue that memories fade over time, that details can be distorted, and that the UFO craze may have influenced how people remembered those events. They also point out that there's no physical proof, no photos, no verified documents, nothing concrete. But supporters argue that the number of separate witnesses describing similar things can't be ignored, and that military pressure could explain why these stories took so long to emerge. One thing is certain. Something happened in Roswell, and the government has changed its official story not once, but several times. For nearly half a century, the explanation remained weather balloon. Then, in 1994, under pressure from Congress due to growing public interest, the U.S. Air Force reopened the investigation. Their conclusion changed again. It wasn't a standard weather balloon, they said. It was part of a top-secret project known as Project Mogul. Project Mogul was a classified program that used high-altitude balloons fitted with sensitive microphones to detect Soviet nuclear tests. According to the Air Force report, what crashed on Foster Ranch was debris from a mogul balloon train, several balloons connected to monitoring equipment. This explained the strange material. The radar reflectors were made from lightweight but durable components, and the balloons themselves were made from specialized materials. The secrecy, they said, was due to the project's classified nature. The military didn't want to reveal that it was tracking Soviet activity. This explanation satisfied some skeptics. It accounted for the secrecy and the strange debris. But not everyone was convinced. Critics pointed out that Jesse Marcel was an experienced intelligence officer who knew exactly what weather balloons and radar gear looked like, even classified ones. And it still didn't explain the reports of bodies. So in 1997, the Air Force issued yet another report, this time focusing on the alleged alien bodies. Their new explanation? Test dummies. According to the report, between 1953 and 1959, the Air Force had conducted experiments using anthropomorphic dummies dropped from high-altitude balloons to test parachutes and survival gear. These dummies, they claimed, could have been mistaken for small humanoid figures when seen from a distance. Witnesses, the report suggested, had simply confused those later tests with the 1947 incident. The explanation was widely mocked. The dummy tests took place 6 to 12 years after Roswell. Would people really confuse events separated by more than a decade? The dummies were also 6 feet tall, not 4 feet as described, and many witnesses were trained military personnel who certainly knew the difference between test mannequins and living beings. The dummy theory was seen by many as a desperate attempt to dismiss the body reports without admitting to anything extraordinary. There's also another curious part of the story: the documents. Over time, several leaked files have surfaced, the most famous being the Majestic 12 Memorandum, or MJ-12. This document supposedly proves that President Truman created a top-secret committee in 1947 to deal with the Roswell case and extraterrestrial evidence. The MJ-12 document lists 12 high-ranking officials and describes the recovery of a craft and alien bodies in Roswell. But its authenticity remains hotly debated. Many researchers call it a forgery, while others believe it contains details that only recently became declassified, suggesting it could be genuine. The debate continues. What's clear is that the U.S. government has changed its explanation for Roswell at least 3 times. 1947, flying disc, 1947, 24 hours later. Weather balloon, 1994. Project Mogul balloon, 1997. Test dummies for the bodies. Each revision casts doubt on the one before it, leaving many to wonder, if there's truly nothing to hide, why keep changing the story? 78 years later, Roswell remains one of the most debated and mysterious cases in UFO history. Let's explore the leading theories. Theory 1. It really was Project Mogul. This is the official explanation given by the U.S. Air Force and the one most skeptics agree with. According to this theory, the debris that fell came from a balloon train belonging to the top-secret Project Mogul. The strange material people found was part of specialized monitoring equipment. The secrecy around it existed because the project itself was classified. The Army couldn't admit it was conducting surveillance on Soviet nuclear tests. Jesse Marcel and others were likely confused because they had never seen this kind of equipment before. The reported bodies are believed to be memories mixed up with later military dummy tests, further distorted by years of rumors and speculation. This theory accounts for several things: the unusual but earthly material, the government secrecy, and the quick shift in the official explanation. But it also has flaws. Marcel was an experienced intelligence officer and unlikely to mistake simple balloon debris. The timing of dummy tests years later doesn't match the Roswell event. It also doesn't explain why civilian witnesses claimed they were threatened. Finally, Project Mogul records do not show any confirmed launch on that specific date. Theory 2. A crashed extraterrestrial craft. This is the theory supported by many ufologists and researchers of the case. According to this view, a spacecraft of extraterrestrial origin crashed near Roswell, and the government recovered both the craft and the bodies of its occupants. The original flying disc announcement was genuine, but higher authorities quickly ordered a cover-up. The weather balloon story was created to hide the truth, and decades later, Project Mogul was introduced as a more sophisticated cover once the balloon story became unbelievable. Witnesses were reportedly silenced through threats or sworn to secrecy. Documents were either classified or destroyed. The debris and bodies were supposedly transported to secret facilities. Area 51 is often mentioned, for research and analysis. This theory explains several consistent details: descriptions of indestructible materials, strange symbols described by multiple witnesses, threats to civilians, repeated changes in the official story, and an unusually high level of secrecy for something supposedly ordinary. But it too faces problems. There's no verifiable physical evidence, no authentic photos or videos of the bodies or the craft, and no declassified government files confirming extraterrestrial contact. Also, the number of people needed to maintain such a cover-up would have been enormous. Theory 3. A Soviet experimental aircraft. Another theory, though less known, proposes that the debris came from a Soviet experimental aircraft. In 1947, the Cold War was just beginning. The Soviet Union had captured Nazi scientists after World War II, including experts in advanced aviation. Supporters of this idea believe the Soviets were testing a new, unconventional aircraft, possibly based on German designs, that accidentally crashed in U.S. territory. The American government allegedly recovered the wreckage and immediately classified everything. The flying disc announcement was an initial mistake, and officials later decided it was safer to let the public think the object was alien than to admit the Soviets had technology capable of entering U.S. airspace. The bodies could have been Soviet or Asian pilots whose different features were exaggerated over time. This theory could explain the extreme secrecy, genuine national security concerns, immediate military response, the quick change in story, the crash site's proximity to nuclear facilities, and possible espionage motives. However, there's no evidence the USSR possessed such technology in 1947. The debris described by witnesses also doesn't match known Soviet materials. And if that were the case, why would the government keep it secret for 78 years after the Cold War ended? Theory 4. A secret human experiment. A darker theory suggests the crash involved a secret U.S. government experiment. According to this idea, the incident involved an experimental aircraft carrying human test subjects, possibly Japanese or German prisoners of war, who were later described as small bodies. The government then covered up both the technology and the unethical human testing. The alien explanation in this view was actually less politically damaging than admitting to illegal wartime experiments. This theory explains why the case stayed classified for so long, why the bodies were described as human-like but not entirely human, why President Truman reportedly took special interest, and why secrecy still surrounds it. However, it remains mostly speculative and lacks strong support, even among serious Roswell researchers. Theory 5. Nothing extraordinary, just confusion over time. The most skeptical explanation is that Roswell was a combination of ordinary events misinterpreted and exaggerated over decades. A Project Mogul balloon crashed. Because the project was classified, the military's secretive behavior led to public suspicion. Decades later, when researchers interviewed surviving witnesses, they encountered people with fragmented memories who unintentionally turned common details into extraordinary ones. UFO culture, fueled by movies and books, further shaped how people remembered events. The Roswell story eventually took on a life of its own, sustained by tourism and popular media. This theory explains why there's no preserved physical evidence, why reports of bodies only appeared decades later, and why witness accounts often differ. Still, it doesn't fully explain why many credible witnesses stood by their stories until their deaths, even when mocked. So, what really happened in Roswell in July 1947? The honest answer is that no one knows for certain. What is known is this: something definitely crashed near Roswell. That's a documented fact. Debris was collected by the military. The Army initially announced the recovery of a flying disc. Again, a verified event. Less than a day later, the story changed to a weather balloon. 50 years after that, the explanation changed again to Project Mogul, and then later included dummy tests to explain the bodies. Witnesses, including experienced military personnel, insisted for years that the material they saw was extraordinary and nothing like a weather balloon. Other witnesses, even those with second-hand accounts, consistently described seeing non-human bodies. Many government documents related to the case were classified, and some remain secret to this day, 78 years later. Based on the available evidence, it seems clear that something important happened in Roswell, something beyond a simple weather balloon crash. Was it extraterrestrial? There's no definite proof of that. Was it an advanced secret project? Possibly, but it doesn't explain every inconsistency. What's certain is that the U.S. government hasn't been fully transparent about what occurred. The repeated changes in the official story have damaged credibility and left plenty of room for doubt. Roswell teaches us an important lesson about the search for truth. Sometimes the lack of clear answers doesn't mean nothing happened. It may mean some truths are kept hidden for a very long time. 78 years later, Roswell remains the most famous case in the history of UFO research, not because we've proven extraterrestrial contact, but because we've proven that something did happen, something the government believed needed to remain secret, and something that forever changed how humanity views the skies. As long as documents stay classified, witnesses remain unheard, and questions go unanswered, Roswell will continue to fascinate generations. The incident stands as the most examined and discussed event in ufology, a story of discovery, secrecy, and a never-ending search for truth. Each explanation adds pieces to the puzzle, but also opens new mysteries. Was it Project Mogul, an alien craft, Soviet technology, or something still unknown? Every theory has supporting evidence and missing links it can't explain. What do you believe fell in Roswell that summer of 1947? Was it a military balloon, visitors from another world, or something entirely different? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your theory. Thank you for joining me in exploring the most enduring mystery in UFO history.